Good morning, everyone. I call to order this regular meeting of Council for Tuesday, December 7th, and I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I've talked to many people about land acknowledgements, and they say, well, it's like checking the box, and it's just for, our Indigenous neighbors. But you know what? For me, the land acknowledgement's also for me. I need the land acknowledgement because it reminds me of the history that I was never taught. It reminds me of the history that I'm having to incorporate into my mind. This is a reminder to take that moment and recognize that our history didn't start at point of contact. We're living in a place that has a history much longer and richer than that, and we will be richer for having acknowledged that. So I would like to recognize the town of Canmore is located within Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Canmore area known as Shooting at Willows in Stoney Nakoda, and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bearspaw First Nation, Chiniki First Nation, and Wesley First Nation, as well as Tsuut'ina First Nation and Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, play, and help us steward this land, and who honor and celebrate this territory. And of course, this acknowledgement accomplishes very little on its own, and without action, these are mere words. Accordingly, the town of Canmore continues in its commitment to working to live in right relations with Indigenous neighbours and all people, and to advance truth and reconciliation. We'll now move to approval of the agenda for today's meeting. Any changes? Seeing none, I'll move approval of the agenda of December 7th, 2021, regular meeting of Council as presented. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We'll now move to the minutes. First of all, the minutes of October 26th annual organizational meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped right over delegations. I did. You would have been waiting a while if they didn't catch me, sir. I'm sorry for that. All right. I will now call on the delegation from Action on Smoking and Health. Sir, the microphone is yours, and welcome to Council.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll just get my slideshow going here. Wonderful, great. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here, live and in person. We've been doing a lot of Zoom presentations for the last few months, so this is a nice change, especially considering the setting. So Action on Smoking and Health was founded in 1979 and is one of Canada's leading tobacco control organizations with staff across the 4 Western provinces. Over the years, ASH has provided local, provincial, national, and global leadership on tobacco control with a primary focus on raising public awareness and education, community mobilization, applied research, and advancement of public policy initiatives. Here's some hard facts on tobacco. Tobacco use places an enormous burden on our health, our quality of life, and our healthcare system. Tobacco use kills 50,000 Canadians annually, which represents about 20% of all deaths in Canada. About 1 million Canadians are currently living with an illness caused by tobacco use. Sadly, about 1 in every 2 long-term smokers will die from an illness caused by tobacco. Secondhand smoke is also harmful, and it kills approximately 1,000 Canadians annually. In recent years, there's been an explosive rise in youth vaping. According to the last national survey, over 400,000 Canadian youth vaped in the last 30 days. A great majority of these adolescents will develop a long-term addiction to tobacco. And children who vape will also have a 3-fold risk of going on to smoking, children and youth. Recent studies indicate that for every adult who stops smoking through vaping, 80 youth vapors will start smoking. And almost 100% of youth who vape have started vaping using flavored tobacco or flavored vaping products. So flavorings play an enormous role in youth initiation. Modeling is an essential element of childhood development, and it's a very effective learning mechanism. If we model healthy behaviors to kids, we are more likely to get healthy kids and vice versa. We know that parental modeling can influence youth smoking behavior and vaping behavior, but social modeling can be equally as influential. Comprehensive public restrictions on all forms of smoking and vaping are needed to help keep youth tobacco and nicotine free for life. Vaping, cannabis, and hookah use have the potential to renormalize public smoking and therefore to reverse gains made in reducing tobacco use, especially among youth. And youth smoking rates, by the way, in Canada are at an all-time low, so we got to keep them there. But of course, youth vaping is a huge concern. Here are a number of options for Council to consider. We encourage you to amend and rename the cannabis bylaw to ensure that restrictions on smoking and vaping of tobacco align with local restrictions on the smoking and vaping of cannabis to the greatest extent possible. Tobacco kills 50 times more Canadians than cannabis, and any local restrictions on cannabis smoking and vaping can be easily justified for tobacco smoking and vaping. Comprehensive smoking bylaws reduce social modeling to kids, they promote healthy behaviors, they protect low-income workers, and they simplify enforcement. It's a lot easier to tell if someone is smoking and vaping than what they are smoking and vaping. Vaping is more likely to smell like cotton candy than cannabis or tobacco or nicotine. Okotoks, Strathmore, Canmore, Camrose, St. Albert, and Vermilion have already aligned all of their restrictions on tobacco, smoking, vaping of cannabis and cannabis. So it's not the first. You would not be the first municipality to do this. The Canmore bylaw should include provisions to prohibit smoking at all public events held in public venues, and in all public recreation spaces, including parks and public events. Children and youth frequent public events and outdoor spaces, including markets, parks, and recreational spaces, and they should be fully protected from smoking and vaping in these public spaces. Smoking ban should be extended to group living facilities. Residents of group living facilities should not be forced to breathe secondhand smoke in their own home. These residents are often elderly or have health conditions that are aggravated by exposure to secondhand smoke. Council can also ban smoking in all public housing units to provide further protection to vulnerable populations and to children. Council could apply licensing fees to tobacco, vaping, and cannabis retailers. In fact, you may already license your cannabis retailers. Edmonton, Calgary, St. Albert, and Lloydminster have all licensed tobacco retailers, and Lloydminster also licenses vape shops, so those opportunities are there. Licensing fees can be redirected to youth education initiatives, retailer training and communication, public engagement, and of course to defray enforcement costs. Signage is also an important component of enforcement, and no smoking area should be clearly visible and signs should be prominently placed. The good thing about smoking bylaws and vaping bylaws is that they're largely self-enforcing. So if the rules are clear and the signage is prominent, you will have very few public complaints. ASH has a model smoking bylaw that will address all of these issues, and here's a checklist of gold standard policy provisions for your municipality, as previously described. And you should know that the Alberta government has aligned provincial restrictions on tobacco, vaping, and cannabis. However, these restrictions do not extend to many public spaces such as parks, outdoor gatherings, public events, markets, and hookah bars. We urge Canmore Town Council to align restrictions on all substances that can be smoked or vaped and ensure that all public recreation spaces are smoke and vape free. ASH can work with your administration to develop a gold standard smoking bylaw. The ASH Policy Hub lists all available policies and resources in each Western province. The Hub provides a listing of policies and resources categorized by municipalities, school districts, and post-secondary institutions. Please feel free to visit our website to compare your bylaw with other municipalities. Smoking rates are at an all-time low in Canada, and public smoking restrictions are an important part of our overall success. We can't allow these gains to be reversed through the renormalization of public smoking. That's supposed to be a big thank you up on that slide. So thank you for your time this morning. I'll happily take your questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Worship.
Hagan, and thank you for coming to join us in person today for your very informative presentation. I'll now open it to council if there's any questions. Councillor Faubert.
I do have a question for administration through the chair, if that's okay.
Yep.
How many complaints do we get on average about smoking in our community? Do we know? Is that a thing we get complaints about now?
Very few, if any, yes.
If I may, Your Worship, regarding complaints, that's a good sign. That means public acceptance is very high. That also means the public would be very likely to accept any new provisions you can bring into place to provide further protection for children and youth.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I thought it was very interesting that cannabis has been treated much more harshly than tobacco, and bringing those policies in line with each other. I wonder if you could speak further as to why one was treated so much more harshly than the other, and what bringing those in line may or may not do.
Well, I think they both have different histories. A number of jurisdictions across Canada, when cannabis was legalized, decided to align their cannabis restrictions with liquor restrictions. And we were encouraging municipalities and jurisdictions to also align with smoking restrictions. As mentioned, cannabis kills 50 times more Canadians than cannabis. So it's really difficult. From a public health perspective, in fact, it is impossible to justify further restrictions on cannabis than tobacco. And we hope that your council will come to that conclusion. And I apologize, I should have been speaking to everyone here this morning. I realize you're social distancing here.
Yeah.
You've got more than 4 councillors. Thank you.
Yeah, we go with two-tier system here. Mr. Hagan, have you looked specifically at the Canmore bylaws and if there was one thing that you wanted to see changed, what would it be?
There is a bylaw that deals with smoking in hotel and motel rooms, and Canmore was a leader on that in 2005, so thank you for that leadership. But in terms of other bylaws, I really have to look at your cannabis bylaw. I think that's the opportunity to simply rename that bylaw, smoking and vaping, or cannabis and tobacco and nicotine, and then to apply the provisions more consistently for all of the substances. As mentioned, it's impossible to tell what someone is vaping. So if the goal here, one of the goals, is to prevent modeling among children and youth, you should be thinking of all forms of smoking and vaping. The more kids are exposed to any form of smoking and vaping, the more likely they are to become smokers themselves, and there's good, solid, published evidence to support that.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions of council? Oh, Councillor Maw.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hagan. With regards to youth side of things, I do have friends that have kids in high school, or I've worked with kids in high school. I'm actually pretty surprised how many of them do vape. With some of these various bylaws that have been introduced in some of these other communities, do you have any data on how those bylaws have actually made an impact, say, at the vaping in the junior highs and high school level? Mm-hmm.
Well, we have global evidence, really, showing that smoking restrictions are the second most effective means of reducing tobacco use, apart from tax increases. So if smoking restrictions have that impact, we can definitely anticipate that vaping restrictions would have the same, especially since kids perceive them as the same.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no more questions, just to let you know, council's procedure is that we don't do anything today when we hear a delegation. This matter will come back at our next regular meeting in early January, at which point we will address our options ahead of us and decide how we'd like to proceed at that time. So you can tune in. We are live streamed, or you can drop by and take,
Might just do
sit in. Great. Thanks very much for your presentation today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, now I'll move to the approval of minutes, beginning with the October 26th annual organizational meeting of council. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I move approval of the minutes of October 26, 2021 annual organizational meeting of council as presented. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now turning to the minutes of November 2nd, any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I move approval of the minutes of November 2nd, 2021 regular meeting of council as presented. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we will go to item G1, which is the revised land use bylaw amendment 2021-2024 Omnibus. Mr. Gravel, whenever you're ready, the microphone is yours.
How's that? Very good.
Well done, well done.
My second career. Good morning, Mayor Krauser, member of council. My name is Nathan Gravel. I'm a development planner for the town's planning department. I'll start off by saying it's good to be back in council chambers. This is my first opportunity, so it's nice to be out of the house and not worry about your children running in the middle of a presentation. I'll briefly introduce Bylaw 2021-24 for first reading. The bylaw includes 25 minor amendments to the town's land use bylaw. I'm not really going to run through them all. You have them in your package. If there's anything you want clarified at the end, happy to run through them. For those unfamiliar with the Omnibus, it's a way that administration makes minor updates to the land use bylaw. So we usually do it 1 to 2 times a year. It's an opportunity to add additional clarity to regulations, to definitions, fix grammatical errors, things like that. So a couple of minor tweaks here and there, essentially housekeeping items. That's what administration feels Bylaw 2021-24 is. If you're curious about the development of the Omnibus, once you approve a new bylaw or you have an existing bylaw, staff who use the bylaw will note any discrepancies or anything that needs fixing as they apply it. Stakeholders will often raise issues, and we collect these into a master list, and then we advance these forward based on capacity and priority. So we'll be seeing a little bit more of each other. There's 60 amendments in the queue, so I'll be here 1 to 2 times a year for your enjoyment. I'll have some more ZZ Top prepared. And so administration recommends that council give first reading to bylaw 2021-24 and schedule a public hearing for January 11th, 2022. There was a discrepancy noted in the bylaw, the proposed section 8.1. It just conflicts with another section, so that'll actually need to be removed from the bylaw. But
Thanks, and I'll bring that amendment. Yep, thank you.
That's my presentation. Happy to take any questions council has.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Looking to council to see if there are any questions. Going once. Going twice. No questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Gravel.
Thank you.
I will then move that council give first reading to Bylaw 2021-24, revised land use bylaw amendment, Omnibus, and schedule a public hearing for January 11th, 2021. I will start by making a proposed amendment as alluded to by Mr. Gravel, and Ms. Hyde, if you could put that up on the screen. So there was an addition in the bylaw that is actually redundant because it's dealt with in section 1.11. technical, for viewers at home, we're having technical difficulties. Yes, that's the one. Yep, that was it. So the amendment that I'm proposing is that council strike 8.10 and 8.10.0.1 from the proposed bylaw 2021-24. This is brings in development permits for an administrative sales office, may be approved for a maximum 1 year and may be reapplied for. That's actually dealt with elsewhere in the land use bylaw. And so administration has recommended that this be removed from the proposed bylaw. Are there any discussions on this proposed amendment? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now I open it up to discussion on the main motion as amended. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, we have a public hearing set for January 11th for second reading. Now, since we are just dealing with the land use bylaw, there is a motion arising that Councillor McCallum would like to bring.
I almost said Mayor Barman. I almost said it.
It will take time.
But I didn't.
It will take time.
I did not.
Thank you.
That's my big win today. Thank you. Yes, I would like to bring forward a notice of, not a notice of motion, a motion rather, with regards to election signage on municipal property. And I believe the clerk has the wording.
Yeah, and there it is.
Excellent. So to speak to this, actually I'll read it out loud. The council directed administration to return to council by December 31st, 2022 with a report on options for regulating or managing election signage on municipal property. And so the wording has changed since originally this was conceived. This is, of course, the third time I'm bringing this forward in my career as a Canmore Town Councillor. I'm hoping this third time's charm. As we saw in the most recent municipal campaign, it became inherently clear to the community and to many of you who have spoken to this with me and with each other that old-fashioned electioneering, like wasteful signs, proliferated all over public property, is no longer appropriate in our community. And I know in past, the timing of when I have brought this change forward has been questioned, not only, mostly by the public actually, not actually by my colleagues, which I'm grateful for. But you know, I think that if we say that we are a environmentally forward-thinking community and that we are engaged and so on and so forth, that that old-fashioned style of electioneering isn't really necessary. It provides a barrier for people who are running in terms of the financing because they're very expensive. And as we've seen in this last election, they have a variety of, actually I would say they have very little impact. We saw candidates that had tons of signs not make it in the top 10. We saw candidates with tons of signs that made it in the top 6. And all, the only thing I would say that even the biggest signs didn't even make it in. So I just feel like the sign thing is pointless. And we are a tourist community, and it is actually quite offensive to the eyeballs, I think, for some people when they come into our community to see them proliferated all over the place to be found. I'm still finding signs in the forest when I go walk my dog. And so I'm bringing this forward with a lot of notice to administration. The wording on it has changed because we do want to be cognizant of charter rights. But at the same time, I think it's appropriate. It's a lot of time, and it will be in place before the next election hits the cycle, hopefully. And so I ask for all your support.
Thank you, Councillor McCallum. I'll certainly support this motion. Originally, in talking about this issue, we had been talking about jumping right to the solution of eliminating signs, and I think it's very good that we're just taking a slight step back, as has been suggested by admin, that they come back with options for us. So what we're doing right here is we're not really making a decision about signage, but we're inviting those options to come to us. And then depending on what happens, there may or may not be a change to the land use bylaw, which would then trigger a public hearing and all of that. This is simply getting that on the table for administration to come back to us within the next year. And we'll go from there. I echo many of the concerns raised by Councillor McCallum with respect to signage. At one point, it was a major way of getting your name out. But we actually saw in this last election, it was a barrier to those who couldn't afford to participate in ordering signs. And in fact, there are many ways nowadays that are free or practically free to get your name out. And of course, I would always be supportive of being able to have some signs on private property. That's a real show of democracy and a statement, much more than, and I've participated obviously in putting signs out, but me putting a sign out on Bow Valley Trail says nothing more than I know how to put a sign out on Bow Valley Trail. Well, and you know what, and my view of this has changed even over the last 10 years. As social media has become more and more, and quite frankly, the proliferation of signage has gotten worse. And so I really am hearing those that, and quite frankly, it's a bother from a candidate's point of view. It's a cost, but you're constantly having to track down signs that somebody has taken, or I've fished them out of the Bow River. I've gone and sought them in the forest. I see a stake there, and then you have to collect them at the end of the day. I recycle, as I'm sure most of us do. You recycle and keep them and use them again, but it's just distracts you from the real issue, and that's getting out and talking to people. So I very much support taking a look at this and doing so before the next election that will come along, and that would be a provincial election in the spring of 2023, and we'll see if that has a bearing on that when we see the options. So, Councillor Graham.
Thank you for bringing this motion forward. I too am very supportive of this, and I echo a lot of the comments the Mayor and yourself have made as well. I wonder about the wording of the municipal property, and if you could speak to that as to opposed to public property.
Thank you for pointing that out. Good eye. So, it's the red button.
I got it.
Hit the button. Eat the mic. So we actually don't have control over what happens on provincial property. And so that's the reason why we aren't actually able to create bylaws that affect provincial property. So it's my understanding from the clerk that the provincial government has their own rules. They actually don't permit signs on their property, but it's also about horsepower, whether they have the horsepower to go out and say, get your sign off my property, or get your sign off their public property. So that's the reason why I've decided to focus on what we have control over, which is our own municipal public property. That doesn't stop us from being able to complain to the province when there's people are breaking their rules. But right now, for this bylaw, I'm focusing on what we have control over.
Thank you for that. I agree with you, and I think when this comes forward to the public, municipal property sounds to me like the Civic Center. You can't put signs on the Civic Center. I don't think anybody did that this time around, right? So when it goes to the public, I wonder if we could find verbiage that worked more in the so that the the folks may understand that a little more clearly. But
I'm sure
yeah.
admin is listening to you right now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the intent is that it's public property over which the municipality has control.
Yes.
Right. Councillor Ma.
Thank you. I support this motion. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially moving forward. We had an industrious, innovative candidate at the last election with a very sizable sign on the back of a truck that was moving around and at times parked on the road, sometimes public roads, sometimes. I was just curious, from an administration's perspective, has been thought towards that? It's like if someone has a big massive sign on their truck and it's parked, is that municipal property and this is an issue that we need to flag, or is it constantly moving around? Is it like, okay? Yeah.
I'm
Well, I'm
thinking,
thinking like there are certain Canada, massive, it's like, yeah.
I'm thinking that actually that's what, I don't know if admin actually has an answer to that right now, because that's actually what this is it's about asking admin to go take a look at it.
Right.
Ms. Miller?
Through you, Mayor Krauser, yes, that'll be something that we would look into. What you're describing is what in most jurisdictions are considered mobile signs, and they can be a bit tricky to regulate, so that is something that we will, based on this motion, explore and bring back in the report.
Okay, thank you. I was curious about the
Thank you.
tempo and timing, because sometimes some stuff is static and some stuff is moving, and like, when is it like offside? Yeah.
And that's why it's challenging to regulate mobile signs, because if you're going to enforce them, you need to catch it while it's happening or have evidence of that it occurred. And since it's constantly moving, that can create some challenges. So we can definitely explore that as part of the report that comes back to council.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I call the question. Oh. Questions, debates, it's all the same thing. Sorry, comment. Do you have a comment? There you go.
I'm now ready to speak. Thank you. Thank you for this motion. I will support the motion because I want to hear back from administration some expert advice on this. But I'm apprehensive because one of the things, I don't disagree with everything that everyone has said, right? The signs are ugly. It's environmentally, from a sustainability perspective, one-off use of plastic that could be thrown away or reused. I have myself been very vocal about ugly signage in the past and having stringent signage regulations. But when it comes, there's this thing that trumps all that for me is free, fair, and open democratic processes. And I think that when we remove the ability of candidates in elections to be able to put their names out in this form, even though it may be antiquated and slowly dying out, is that an appropriate use of our regulatory power when it comes to these processes? So I would love to explore that question further. I think that there is potentially a sweet spot where we can see less of what we saw that bothered us last time without also eliminating the possibility of people using this mechanism to put their name forward in a democratic process. If it wasn't for Jin's homemade signs, I wouldn't have known who he was. And I got to know him that way. So I will support the motion, and I look forward to the advice we're going to get back. And I think that we have lots of time to consider this. Thank you.
Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you. Thank you for this motion. I will also support it, and I will echo Councillor Forbert's some of her concerns. I do like to see the options for regulating it because, you know, I think a little bit more regulation might not be a bad thing, but completely removing it might not be the answer either. So I'm curious to see what options that amendment comes up with. So I'll support this motion at this time and see what we get back.
Councillor Mara.
I too will support this motion. I do echo what everyone else has said, and I do like the wording of this motion because it's managing and regulating. So there's lots of options that can come forward, and I look forward to seeing them.
Councillor McCallum to close.
It's finally the right color. I hear you all. If any of you were paying attention when this has come back in the form of a full ban, this has come forward as a partial ban with a sign. You could put a location up on, or sorry, a sign up on, I think there was 6 locations chosen around town, but at the end of the day, self-preservation prevailed and the bylaw was never changed. So I'm hoping that we have the ability to look past our own self-preservation and see the importance. You know, I understand that signs can be recycled, but the energy required to make them in the first place is actually not awesome either from an environmental perspective. So I was lucky. No, I wasn't lucky. All of my 80 signs were on private property this past election, and I'm quite proud of that. And I did not print any more, and I have officially recycled them because, as many of you know, this is my last term as a town councillor, so I will not be speaking in any way of self-preservation when we look at this bylaw change. And I am looking forward to creative solutions from our administration because I know they got them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Great. Move now to item G2, Development Authority Bylaw Amendment. Ms. Smithers, whenever you're ready, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Krausert and members of council. I don't have a presentation for this report to put on the slide deck. I'm dating myself on the PowerPoint presentation, so I'll just speak to it. This is proposing a change to the subdivision authority bylaw that allows the administration to remain as the subdivision authority, so it gets rid of the distinction between primary and secondary subdivision applications and removes the need for a committee of council to act as the subdivision authority on the primary applications. And the reason for this is that subdivision applications, particularly the bigger ones that would constitute in the past the primary subdivision authority, tend to be quite technical in nature. So they require a solid understanding of the engineering, design, and construction guidelines, of our bylaws and procedures. The bylaws and policies are council approved. So there were a couple of issues with that. One is it puts council or members of council who are on the subdivision authority in a challenging position because they're being required to make decisions on technical matters that they may or may not have a depth of understanding and experience with. And in doing so, it also adds time to the subdivision application process, because to get from the point where administration, from planning or engineering or public works, are satisfied that all their concerns have been addressed, to writing the report, to getting in front of subdivision authority, it could add up to a couple of months to that timeline process without a commensurate value add in any material changes to the decision that was being made. So for that reason, we were finding an inefficiency there, and then we looked at similar sized municipalities across Alberta and found that there was only one of about a dozen or so that actually had council acting as the subdivision authority. There were about a half a dozen that just had administration act as the subdivision authority, and then another half dozen or so that had either administration or planning commission act as the subdivision authority. And in considering that, we thought that delegating some decisions on subdivision applications to Planning Commission doesn't address either of the two issues that we had found with those applications. Having the technical expertise to render a decision on the file or reducing the time it takes to get to a decision. So for that reason, we're proposing a change to the bylaw that just has administration be the sole decision maker, has council delegate the subdivision authority to the CAO, who would then delegate it to qualified members of administration. And in doing so, we found that when we looked at the subdivision authority bylaw, in effect, the only relevant part of the bylaw that would remain is that delegation of authority, because the rest of the subdivision authority bylaw as it currently stands relates to rules of conduct of the subdivision authority for that primary authority. So we decided on the best approach being a further recommendation to amend the development authority bylaw such that it addresses the development authority, subdivision authority, and planning commission rules to kind of clean things up there. And then as we went through that, we added some rules around process for Planning Commission, really related to their ability to make motions, because there has been some confusion at Planning Commission around the protocols and procedures for that, whether they needed to follow council rules, whether they didn't. So the best approach in our mind in that case was to add that into the bylaw related to Planning Commission. So I believe those are kind of the high notes of the report and the changes. And our recommendation is that council give first, second, and third reading to the Development Authority amending bylaw 2021-25 as in your package.
Thank you, Ms. Smithers. I wonder if you could just comment, have you received any feedback from BODA on this change?
Yes, we've had some discussion with BODA. When we first were thinking about making this change, we approached them. Their comment was that they agreed with the change in principle, obviously because there is that time saving for their members, but they wanted to see the bylaw itself. So they were sent a copy of the bylaw that's in your package. They do have some comment related to the types of applications that would go to Planning Commission on the Development Authority side, so for development permits. So just this morning I had a conversation with members with their ED and one of their members just to clarify that this bylaw amendment isn't the only time we're ever going to change that bylaw. I think even Ms. Miller and I had a conversation last week about the need for more clarity in the bylaw itself around what goes to Planning Commission and what doesn't. But having said that, we both recognize that that really just relates to development permits, that for the change that we're proposing today related to the subdivision authority, we're not suggesting that subdivision applications go to Planning Commission. So in my follow-up with BODA, they're fine with knowing that that is a conversation that will take place at some point in the future as the planning department is ready to have that conversation with them.
Great, thank you. Looking to council if you have any questions. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Smithers. Sometimes in the past, in a subdivision application, the applicant and administration have a different position on something within it. How would a situation like that be resolved without having a subdivision authority of council to kind of hear and decide on that?
So I'll open and then throw over to Ms. Miller for the detailed answer. I would say that generally now, by the time that applications get forward to that primary subdivision authority that is constituted of members of council, any outstanding issues have been generally resolved because, again, they relate to like road standards or engineering specifications or that type of thing. So we wouldn't bring it forward to the authority unless we had a high degree of confidence that what was being put forward was viable from the town's point of view. And I'll throw it to Ms. Miller.
Ms. Miller?
I would also note that if we were at an impasse with an applicant with regard to a subdivision application, the process would be that the administration would refuse it and the applicant would have a right of appeal to the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board.
Thank you for that clarification. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Smith. Oh, did you have something? Yes, I did. Oh, okay.
Thank you for this presentation, Ms. Smithers. I can totally see the benefits where you guys are coming from with the red tape side, and I'm just trying to understand, because I'm new to this, so forgive me, guys. Like, this is my first time with some of this stuff, and I'm just curious. Like, does this make, in essence, by passing this, the subdivision authority obsolete? Because it's going to be going strictly through. Yeah, I'm just a little confused by the wording of it all. Please.
So the committee, that primary subdivision authority committee, would no longer be in place. So the subdivision authority would just remain delegated to the CAO for all types of subdivision. And then again, that then cascades down to qualified members of administration. So it doesn't, the subdivision authority doesn't become obsolete, it rests with those professionals in engineering and planning.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Faubert?
Oh, sorry. I know in the past that subdivision has been used in terms of council's objectives around phasing, for example, in Silvertip. And commercial, like the commercial coming forward at a certain point in the AR, in terms of the overall plan, and that ended up being appealed to a higher court. If council delegates its authority for subdivision to the CAO, what role do we play in overseeing that those intentions from those higher plans are meeting our objectives, at which I might, like, I realize, like, the awkward middle ground is the politics, right? Because, you know, the technical stuff, right? That, like, clearly there are people who are more qualified to judge, you know, slopes and road engineering designs. But sometimes I think in these applications we encounter political issues. So how do we navigate that as the elected officials when we've delegated our power?
No, it's a great question. My answer would be that, in summary, council sets policy and administration follows policy. So council's opportunity to address things like phasing, that was a really good example in the Silvertip ASP, that was done in the policy direction. And then administration follows that policy direction, and we worked with the applicant to find the best way forward to honor the guidance that the policy offered.
Thank you. Any other questions of council? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Smithers, for your presentation. Ms. DeSoto, you wanted to add a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to expand on Ms. Smithers' point, just because I did see a couple of puzzled looks. So when Ms. Smithers was speaking to policy, the policy document is the area structure plan itself. The subdivision is not the policy. So the phasing is in that area structure plan. It's laid out there, and it's incumbent on the administration to ensure that policy is followed within the subdivision. So that's what she's referring to there. It's in the policy, and so we would work with the applicant to achieve that policy. So the politics should not get to the subdivision stage.
Councillor Hillstad, did you have? Okay. All right, seeing no other questions then, I will move that council give first reading to the Development Authority amending bylaw 2021-25. And speaking to that motion, Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you. So I will support this because I think a lot of the changes make complete sense. I do have one very small amendment, which I believe is going up on the screen now, and it's very small. So the amendment is just to amend section 15A by striking out his or her and inserting there, just to lessen the words and also just to make it more inclusive. It just it's slightly, you know, the whole his and her stuff is a little outdated and just simplified. So
I just have a question through to administration. just occurred to me, so that's actually the bylaw that's being amended that you're doing there. So do we need to actually change the wording so that the amending bylaw includes this change? Ms. Hyde?
Thank you. The way I'll word it in the motion is this is actually an amendment to your motion to give first reading to this bylaw.
Okay.
So it will say to give first reading to this bylaw, including the following amendment. So it will add this amendment to the bylaw
To
that
the
you
amendment-
are.
to
Does
the
that make
amending-
sense? You're
Yeah.
actually amending a motion, technically not the bylaw itself.
Yeah,
Yeah, by adding these words.
right. So at the end of the day, though, the amending bylaw is what will be changed to include.
To include a
The
section
change
that
of
says this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great, thank you. I certainly will support this motion. Any other comments or discussion on this motion? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I too will be supporting this motion. I got to say, there have been times when I have looked at subdivision authority, the reports and everything attached and went like, this is way above my pay grade. This is information that Joe Public does not know and will have to go to university to generally understand. And so I have honestly always wondered why we were in charge of that. Done my best to read, to understand it, but at the same time, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an urban planner. I am not a subdivision specialist. I don't understand physically how slope works off the back of my hand. So I think that this is actually best in the hands of those that are skilled in this language and in this work. At the same time, I do appreciate Councillor Faubert's comment about making sure that council intent is discovered or still upheld within the subdivision. I've never really considered subdivision, maybe once, considered subdivision to be political, but at the same time, now that I understand my role and its role, it probably, in the end, wasn't necessary nor appropriate. So I'll be supporting this.
So, and I certainly echo those comments with respect to the main motion, but are there any other comments on the amendment?
Oh, sorry, thank you, my apologies. Yeah, I'm supporting your amendment too.
Okay. Seeing no, did you want to comment?
All
on
the
amendment?
talking,
Okay.
all at once.
Then I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we're returning to the main motion as amended. And thank you again for those comments, Ms. McCallum, or Councillor McCallum. I will actually echo those and add or just reiterate that I don't think politics should have any place in these decisions. Once the policy is set, and it becomes too much about who's bringing applications and why, and that should be removed from the process. So I certainly support this motion. Now, Councillor Faubert, you wanted to speak to the motion?
I'm in support of this change, and I think that, it's important to recognize we're delegating our authority. We're not, it can always, if it doesn't work, change. Not that it wouldn't work. And the reason why I know this will work is because, right, I have sat in on subdivision, and I have tried to translate what happens there to something that everyone can understand in terms of a 400-word story, and it can be quite intense, often very technical. And one thing that I just want to acknowledge and thank administration for is bringing forward something that increases efficiency and and creates better processes in planning and development. That's it, right? I think that there's definitely some voices out there criticizing us and how we do things, but what I'm seeing here is initiative to address areas where our processes could be better and more streamlined And that's excellent. And I think that we're going to reap the benefits of not having to sit through subdivision anymore. Thank you.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too echo everything that's been said, and I do see here too that it will also help speed up the process. I know that our departments have been sort of overwhelmed, and I think this will move things forward and quicker. And knowing that there is, when there is an impasse, that there is another mechanism to move forward so that the applicant or whoever's moving the application forward has the opportunity to bring it before the SDAB. So I will support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Hillstead.
I will also support this for many of the reasons already stated. I believe the last subdivision authority that I was a part of had about 1,200 pages of technical reports. And yeah, that, yeah, it's just, you know, even trying to read through all that, like at the end of the day, it basically goes to what we're doing now. It's, you go off of what admin has provided and their expertise, and because I'm not going to be able to decide that they're right or wrong on it because I don't have the technical expertise in those specific areas. So it just would go back to admin's recommendations anyway. So really this to me is, instead of adding that extra process, it's just letting admin do what admin needs to do, and they're the subject matter experts, so that's who should be making those decisions when it comes to the technical bits of subdivision. We set the policy with approving whichever ASP or other planning document that brought that subdivision forward, and that's where we get to play in the sandbox. And I don't feel that we should have been in that sandbox to begin with, but it was a thing of the past, and I think this is the right direction to go.
Thank you. And to just restate that there still is a method by which appeals can be made should the applicant not be satisfied with the decision, and that's through the Subdivision Development and Appeal Board. And once again, then that's also not a political body, even though there is a representative from council. It's made up of members of the community, and often many of them have technical expertise. So, any other comments, debate on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move that council give second reading to the Development Authority amending Bylaw 2021-25. Any comments on that motion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now seek leave from council to give third reading to the Development Authority amending Bylaw 2021-25. And just as a matter of process, according to the MGA, we are required to have unanimous vote of council in order to go to third reading in one sitting. This motion is about simply going to third reading, which I will then bring if it's passed unanimously. Vote on that question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now I'll move that council give third reading to the Development Authority amending Bylaw 2021-25. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Why don't we take a break right now, just a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 10 after 10. get a hold of all this. All right, so now that I'm on the record again, I'll just repeat that. Welcome back. I misspoke during an earlier motion when we set the public hearing for January 11th, 2021. We're obviously not going to go back in time. It was obviously meant to be 2022. So that will just be an error that is corrected by Ms. Hyde. So now, with that done, we'll now move to item H1, Canmore Library and Marigold Library Board appointments. Now, there's not going to be a presentation by administration on this one. It's fairly straightforward. I assume the council has read their package, and so I would just first of all ask if there are any questions of council with respect to these appointments. Seeing none, I will move that Council, 1, appoint V.J. Domingo to the Canmore Library for a 3-year term ending at the October 2024 annual organizational meeting, and 2, appoint Jennifer McCauley as the Canmore Library Board representative to the Marigold Library Board. Are there any comments or discussion on those motions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay. Moving on then to, if I might cooperate here, H2, Business Recovery Task Force report to Council. Ms. McClett, feel free to start anytime you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, Your Worship and members of Council. I'm here today to bring you the Business Recovery Task Force report to Council. As a background, the temporary task force was struck as part of the COVID response work Economic Development has done in June of 2020. The task force objectives were to identify pain points to recovery, barriers to success, support of the return of Canmore's workforce, and looking at what retention and development strategies could look like, support business in their recovery and growth, and look for future growth opportunities beyond the recovery. Economic development has often been outlined as herding cats, and the task force was no different. When you bring different people into a room and they all have different ideas on what recovery looks like and what might be brought forward. So currently the motion in front of you is that Council accept the Business Recovery Task Force report for planning purposes. And there we are, we're back in line with the presentation. So one of the things that we did early on when we saw the quite broad spectrum of ideas that were brought to the table is develop a decision-making matrix. How does the initiative support the Business Recovery Task Force objectives, as discussed earlier? Does it support the pillars of the economic development strategy that Council adopted in early 2020? Does the initiative contribute to environmental impact, sustainability? Does the industry sector, what industry sectors does it support? And what is the socio-economic impact? So we looked forward, how do we nurture an inclusive, local, and diverse economy? And how do we remove pain points in that process? The task force also looked at an 80-20 split, so 80% of the work focused on our current workforce and labor force, and 20% looking at beyond, so that growth and attraction piece in the economy. Interestingly enough, as they worked their way through the recommendations and the scoring, the process focused predominantly on labor recruitment and retention strategies, then on supporting local, and then looking beyond local. So how do we grow into the future? I will highlight that the task force also recognizes that the recommendations brought forward are contingent on staffing and funding, and that it does not identify the needs of a specific industry sector, but rather looked at the biggest impact to the business community as a whole and where the pain points are presently in going from COVID reactive to recovery type work. So the first recommendation, and this is not new to council and something that you probably heard often on the campaign trail, is that they would like to see council's continued focus on affordability. Elements like illegal short-term vacation rentals, education on what is living wage and how does it impact businesses, how do we actually deal with those numbers, creating a working group to really understand what the obstacles are and solutions to affordability in housing, and developing mechanisms to increase the number of attainable housing units through CCS or other public-private partnerships, is a recommendation brought forward by the task force. And I will note that I am abbreviating what's in the actual report rather than reading the full wording out to you. The second recommendation, and as I noted, these are all in order of priority, is around a labor recruitment and retention strategy. As you noted this past summer, many businesses had signs on, please be kind, we're hiring, and we don't have the labor force. So they were often closed for additional hours or for days in a week in order to not burn out the staff that they have. Housing, affordability, BDC did a great report on all the things that make the perfect storm that we're currently in when it comes down to the labor market. The labor force recruitment and retention strategy is something that can be funded through Alberta Labour and Immigration and can deal with other elements such as housing, how to build capacity, how to develop career, and work with businesses on formalized recruitment and retention strategies. The next one was building of a homeowner to business housing platform where business owners can connect their staff to available legal accommodations within Canmore. And there are various mechanisms that this can deal with. As Lisa Brown noted with the housing coordinator, we've had a few conversations as well, what that might look like into the future. When we look at Support Local, one of the campaigns that the town was able to work jointly with the Chamber of Commerce with and BODA is our Support Local, or Buy It in the Bow, or Find More in Canmore campaign. Through partnerships, we were able to leverage over $40,000 in funding through the Alberta Chamber of Commerce and a grant application from the Bow Valley Chamber of Commerce to support a Buy It in the Bow campaign and support our local businesses through many great events and initiatives throughout the last couple of months. The fifth recommendation is a Made in Canmore portal. The website will showcase locally made goods and services to a broader audience and amplify marketing efforts and e-commerce sales for our local businesses. So a lot of work that's been done as part of the COVID response is build capacity. How do we get businesses that have just a storefront to sell their products online, to create an online awareness of what they have to offer? And how do we amplify their work? Because marketing is expensive. And so this is one of the mechanisms the task force thought we could be amplifying that work. So promote local procurement, so build awareness of what is out there and available to the business-to-business supports and to local consumers, and develop a contract readiness training to support local businesses in accessing procurement opportunities, both locally, provincially, and federally. And so we're working with the Executive Director of BODA on developing that as well with the province and federal government. When we look beyond local, I'm one behind, and this fits within the economic development strategy, is the retail and commercial gap analysis and light industrial and commercial land review, which is currently out there, and we have received applications for this already. The eighth recommendation is around developing a winter strategy by striking a winter strategy task force to look at opportunities that fits within regenerative tourism. This could be done in partnership with Tourism Canmore Kananaskis, but also has an impact on the town in operating depending on the type of recommendations that are brought forward. And so that was a question earlier on in council training. How strategic are we at attracting winter events? and promoting that. And so the task force recommendation is indeed to become a bit more strategic in how we develop those opportunities. An interesting one is about accessibility to broadband. So upon review of the task force, Canmore was actually found to not be lacking on the CRTC standards. So that's 50 Mbps download and 10 for upload. And when we look at the current map, Canmore actually doesn't qualify for some of the grant funding out there to build infrastructure in this space. What we did find is that the cost of access to broadband is highly prohibitive, and for businesses as well for people. So the broadband is asking council and administration to lobby other levels of government on broadband infrastructure development and affordability, and asked to look at including accessibility under affordable services for residents that are unable to pay. Now that can be done through a town-based program. However, a number of providers also provide support for low-income families, and it might just be building awareness about what's available to lower-income families in order to have access to broadband. The 10th recommendation is a research and development center of excellence. So many conversations have been had over the last number of years with educational institutions on their expansion or coming into Canmore to build more presence here. The question really is about, is it viable? Is it sustainable? What are the areas that we should be focusing on? How do we as a town partner on these initiatives, or maybe not, and looking at that. So the recommendation is to do a study on the feasibility and viability of this process. And again, grant funding opportunities have been identified for this recommendation. The 11th recommendation comes around work that we are already doing, but the task force asks us to keep vigilant in this area, and that's a review of town's current processes and timelines to establish baseline information to focus on ways to improve. So the presentation that planning just brought for you is a great example of ways that we can improve our processes. We have already brought in consultants to assist us with reviewing processes, and we will continue doing that work into 2020 and beyond to make sure that we are streamlining and making things better for businesses and easier in the process. And the last recommendation brought forward to council is in building awareness and education around supply chain initiatives. So one of the things that you have seen is the long timelines that it takes to get construction material. We have seen a local company shut down because of lack of sustainable supply chain to their business in 2021 already. And so how do we improve those processes? Where are the opportunities? How do we tag into what is out there? So I do have this spreadsheet, and my apologies that it is a little small in its nature. And these are the estimated costs that the task force projects some of these initiatives will cost, and some of the timelines associated with them. Now, of course, we'd like all of this to see all of this done tomorrow, but we recognize that we lack the capacity and the labor force to do so. So we've extended them in years instead of months, and identified what the sources or the partnerships might be and which elements are already in progress. Some of these recommendations were not available when we did the budget development. And so either if grant funding becomes available, will be brought to council throughout the year or part of the regular budgeting process in the future. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. McClett, for that presentation, and I'm looking to council. Questions? Councillor Mara.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. I do just want to make a comment and say thank you for your efforts, because I do know that there was a lot of herding cats. And I know it was hard during COVID to do this task force because a lot of our business owners were involved in their business, and really the stress was on focusing on their business, and did have, limited time to provide us with information. So I just want to thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Councillor Faubert.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. McLett. I think it was noted we're not alone in terms of experiencing challenges post-COVID, recovery, labor market, retention, recruitment. Are there programs that you came across or recovery efforts at other levels of government that we as a municipality or the business community could take advantage of over the next year to accomplish some of these outcomes?
So is this specifically to labor market retention and
Not
recruitment?
specific,
Okay.
anything on that list, like, I mean, if, I'm not aware of any, but, I mean, it just seems like if we're not the only municipality struggle, or business sector, economy, tourism is very much one of those industries that's global, and we're affected by global events, 9/11, SARS, COVID. And so when there's efforts at higher levels of government to kind of, to support that industry or industries overall, what can we get money from them? How can we pay for some of these things without paying?
So the
for
answer
them?
is yes. So a number of areas have been identified and are outlined in the spreadsheet of where we believe we can find grant funding for some of the larger projects, like a labor market recruitment and retention strategy, as well as some of our research work. The federal and provincial government are both doing work around supply chains, identifying where the opportunities might lie to mitigate some of the challenges that businesses are experiencing, and further amplified now by the disasters in British Columbia. And we're seeing that impact our local businesses and what's on store shelves currently. So yes, and we'll keep track and monitoring those, and if there's opportunities indeed to find funding and we need council approval, those will come back to council for sure.
And of course, if council becomes aware of any opportunities, please forward them on to Ms. McLeod.
Please do.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Ms. McLett. I wonder if there's any sort of report on the current state of the economy in Canmore. I know that there are businesses that benefited from COVID, quite frankly, and some that were absolutely decimated, and some very much in the middle of that. I wonder if is there any sort of economic dashboard? Do we know what current unemployment rates? Do we know what GDP is? Do we know any of those numbers readily?
So there's a number of things that we do know. We've been able to access EI data on a quarterly basis, and so we have the numbers of people that, based on a postal code, because we often get lumped in with the entire western side of the province, from Bragg Creek all the way to Peace River, and often our employment types and industries are very different, so it's hard to get some really accurate data. The Job Resource Center here in Canmore does a number of reports on those components. We are finalizing a business impact survey with our local businesses, so that we'll have that data next week to kind of understand the impact of COVID, where they see the opportunities, where the challenges are, and we can bring that back to council once that has been finalized. As for GDP, I don't know. It's also not my favorite. I will confess, it's not my favorite way to monitor success of a community. Because often, so after the floods, the GDP in Canmore soared. Why? Because of all the recovery efforts. And so I challenge that number as a measuring tool. It is a measuring tool. It is a widely accepted measuring tool.
Fair.
But I think quality of life, a happiness index, or other mechanisms like that would be a better way to measure if our community is doing well versus just how much money is being spent.
Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. McLett. As Councillor Mira iterated earlier, it was a bit of herding cats, and I am guilty of being a cat that needed to be herded from time to time. It's a terrible time of day for me to meet.
No comment.
I tried. So I wanted to comment for my colleagues that as part of my work on the Alberta Urban Municipalities, which is called something else, which I can't remember what the branding is, but you all know what I mean. That was the biggest run-on sentence ever. That I sat on the Economic Recovery Task Force for Alberta Urban Municipalities, and we put together a document with some of the points similar to what, but I would say that many of the things that we were doing as a community was not even on their radar. So like enabling in terms of childcare and so on and so forth, and getting people back to work and so that their families are taken care of, wasn't even on anybody's radar. It was more about, and the zoning implications of that. So I'm really pleased with what this report has produced, because it certainly has produced some things that are not vanilla for the pablum for the masses, which I think when you're looking at a report that's supposed to try to help all these municipalities all through Alberta is kind of what you get to a certain extent. I do know that the University of Alberta actually has a planning course called Alberta Winter Cities, and it's been put on hold for a year. I'm not sure why, probably COVID, but it might be something that would be interesting for us to see if they can fire that back up again. It's through one of their planning certificates, I believe. And I also know that the City of Edmonton about 5 years ago hosted a Winter City Conference that was to invite people from all over to, again, try and bring out the winter part of the community, which I believe Ian O'Donnell worked on that as well. Which is why I thought it would be great that he was on our task force. Anyways, my question was that quite a bit of time has passed since we actually approved this, and we've had it brought to council. Is there anything that's changed substantially in your mind that would affect some of the recommendations in this report? Or was there anything that you were surprised about that came out of this report with regards to the group that you were working with? It's not a trick question. If you weren't surprised, that's cool.
I think the broadband strategy was a surprise for me in its approach and the research done in that work. So that was surprising. Anything else, I can't say that it is a big surprise, but I did appreciate the creative way and out-of-the-box thinking of the task force, and sometimes it was a bit challenging because we had people that think of shop local as this is what we need to do, and others that think about beyond and everything in between. So I think there's some great discussions and great processes, and as you said, it is not for every community what we're proposing and what we're recommending. We're looking at very specifically to Canmore. And I've heard council already say a lot of what we are hearing from the task force. They have heard from the community during the campaigning. So I don't think in that sense anything is new, but it's, really re-emphasizing that the community wants to see, even the business community wants to see. And if they can't house staff, they don't have staff. And that's the shift in the beginning of COVID. When we approved the report, it was more really about getting staff to work. Now we don't have enough staff to keep businesses open. So that's been a real shift from the approval to now.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you for this report, Ms. McLeod. Awesome. Just from your opinion here, part of me wonders for a lot of businesses, perhaps mine as well, we don't really feel we're in recovery mode yet. We're still in survival mode. Just recently, these last month, CEWS, which is the wage subsidy, and the CRS, the rent subsidy, that tapered out. And so and we're still everyone's waiting with bated breath to see if they qualify for what's coming up down the pipe. I think there's a lot of businesses that are tourism-based or service-based here in the Bow Valley are pretty nervous because are we going to be exempt from the new program and stuff? So just curious, moving forward with the task force, I know the task force has been struck, will there be continued visibility on maybe if this goes on longer than we think, we might need to revise some of the recommendations or tweak some stuff as we keep going?
So we continue to monitor and lobby the government for all of the things that you have just notified. I was in a meeting with Minister Horner last week around rural economic development, where the opportunities lie, and re-emphasizing your point that rent subsidy, wage subsidies, these are programs that are keeping businesses alive and able to operate, and when they disappear, so will some of our businesses. So the impact of COVID definitely isn't over. Sure. When we hear of new variances, everybody's stress levels go up just a few notches, and we need some deep breathing in order to calm it back down. But we keep monitoring those things and looking to adapt and pivot. Some of our business resiliency work will continue on. So regionally, we just got approved for a grant to provide training for businesses to have an online presence in e-commerce and social media, to kind of, how do you get the word out there effectively and not get lost in the voices? So we continue to do those elements. It's not over.
Definitely
and we know
not.
that.
Yeah.
The task force, this is the completion of the work of the task force at this point of time. Should we feel at one point that we need to revisit some of the recommendations, we will bring that back to council should that be necessary, but we'll continue pushing forward with the recovery and the response work that we have been doing.
Yeah, thank you. Everything you guys have done has been greatly appreciated. So,
Councillor Faubert.
Yes. I'm not sure if all of council is aware of your involvement beyond Canmore's economic development, but are you not taking over as President of Economic Development Alberta this year, or in 2022?
2022, you're correct, yes.
So, from that perspective, you're certainly attuned to the fact that we're not alone in these experiences, and that collectively, if we are adding our voices to the need for supports, that might help.
Correct. We do a lot of work as Economic Developers Alberta to lobby the government with boots on the ground. It's often interesting to see proposals brought forward with not always consultation of local economic developers who know where their local businesses are at. And so we keep lobbying those things, so that's our board gets invited to lots of engagement sessions, and we keep that going quite well. We have a great executive director, Leanne Hackner-Carter. He used to work for the city of Calgary in the mayor's office years and years ago, but she's been with EDA for many years and is a relentless advocate for rural and local communities, and you would have met her on the task force as well for the province.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. McClett, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very informative. Oh, Councillor Graham, did you have one more? Okay.
I'm just noting the impact of illegal short-term rentals. Can you give me a quick update on where we think we're at with that? Is this, has it reared its ugly head yet again? Where are we at?
Well, I think some of that is community perception, but we used to have enforcement of that, and maybe Lauren Miller from Planning can speak to that, as that position was housed under her umbrella.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Mayor Krauser. Has this issue reared its ugly head? I don't know that it ever went away, per se. We are continuing to respond to complaints that we receive with regard to short-term rentals. I will say that the initial blitz that Council approved by providing resourcing a couple years ago really helped to set the stage and really make it clear for the community that the town has an expectation with regard to short-term rentals and that there is a process. So we are seeing a great deal of compliance. However, this issue is quite complex when it comes to enforcement. The challenge that we're facing now is that short-term rentals are going kind of off the grid. So the normal places that we would look to in order to ensure that properties were in compliance are no longer the places to look anymore. So that is kind of the challenge that we're facing moving forward with short-term rentals, is how do we enforce when we don't know where it is? And the evidence that most residents provide that they feel is a demonstration of a short-term rental doesn't quite fit the bill from a legal perspective and enforcement. So a picture of a number of cars parked in front of a house is not a significant evidence from a legal perspective that an illegal use is occurring on the property. People in a hot tub, people hanging out in the front yard, those are not pieces that make it easy for us as the administration to enforce that particular use. So we have definitely made some strides, but it is becoming more and more difficult to enforce that particular use because it's enforcing what's happening inside of a private residence. And so when it comes to private residence, we either need a warrant or consent in order to be able to find out what's happening inside. And as you can imagine, that can be difficult with these types of uses. So that was a far bigger answer than maybe you were looking for, but tapping into my previous enforcement experience when it comes to this particular use.
Can you speak to, are we receiving complaints about Airbnbs or potential Airbnbs?
So just a quick answer here, but we're starting to vary off it into another topic that we will come back to, but Ms. Miller?
So the number, how many complaints we get in a year? Is that the question? We get approximately 10 complaints with regard to specific properties. So there may be a number of people who are complaining about the same property. But when it comes to properties that are in question, it's approximately 10, and we do follow up where possible on those complaints. So they don't fall on deaf ears, but we want to make sure that we are able to gather enough information in order to pursue an enforcement action where appropriate.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Ms. McLeod. So just a note on process. It's best if you don't turn off your mic yourself because it pops up on my list again as you're wanting to speak. It will go off automatically, okay, when I go to the next speaker. I will now move that Council accept the Business Recovery Task Force report for planning purposes. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none? Oh, I see lots now, all of a sudden. Councillor Hillstead.
I hit my button right away. See none. It's down there.
Talk.
I will support this motion or recommendation. A lot of good work went into this. Curious to see where it goes from here. There's, like I said, there's a lot of good things in that plan, but to see how they come to a head will be interesting, and I hope for good things. So, thanks.
Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mayor Krausert. I just get so excited I have to press the button. I will support accepting this report for planning purposes. I'm happy that the last council invested the time and money into engaging with the business community. I know it was hard work, but coming up with a plan regarding recovery, our current situation, and moving forward, it's good to have a plan. It's good to know where to prioritize our work and our efforts as council to support the business community moving forward. That being said, I'm even in the first two, encourage renewed focus on affordability and development of labor recruitment and retention strategy. I don't think we're alone out there on the chessboard doing this work. It's also the business community. So even though we're accepting this report and we have things to work on, I think we need to also call on the business community to meet us and to do the work themselves as well, which, you know, it's hard because I think one of the strengths of our business community and our economy is the number of small to medium-sized businesses, not the big players, but a lot of small businesses. But that also makes it hard for them to leverage themselves and do things that might require more capital. investment or more resources that a larger corporate entity might have. So I think that's where we come in and where our economic development strengths come in. We can really be kind of that hub, pulling everything together and enabling our business community to bring their resources to the table as well and organizing those efforts. So thank you for this work, and it's not over.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too would be happy to support this report. There were a variety of different voices at the table for this task force, and it's not my first task force, hopefully not my last. But as Ms. McClett articulated, there were people that had like massive big picture thinking as well as very sort of granular thinking. So it made for very interesting discussions. And we also had people at the table where some people were deeply affected by the pandemic and others were completely unaffected. So I think that also adds to the difference of opinions and difference in the voices. Regardless, I'm really pleased with this document. I think that there's some good nuggets that are going to be helpful to the business community. I agree with Councillor Faubert. We need to be sort of met together to move forward with this. We do have a large number of small businesses comparative to many of our competitors and our neighbors, to the point where we are a community of small businesses, more or less. When you look at a community like Cochrane, where they have 1,000 business licenses, and they're nearly double our size, and we have 2,000 business licenses. So it really speaks to me the importance of our small business community in Canmore and how we're very different from other areas of the province and the country. I also wanted to, for a moment, applaud the previous council, which I happen to be a part of, because we wouldn't have had an economic development manager to drive this project if that council had not approved an economic development manager. And although council approved it, admin brought it forward. So, and Eleanor is, from what I hear, everywhere. She's duplicated. She's all over the place and talking to people and really trying to meet people's needs where they're at. And so for that, I'm very grateful. And yeah, so I'm finished talking now. I will approve this. Thank you.
I'll also support the motion, and I would also like to provide my thanks to Ms. McClett for all your hard work, as well as to all of the task force members for giving of their time for this discussion in the community. Seeing no other requests to speak, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll now move to item H3, Stan Rogers Memorial Stage Project. Mr. Hannes, welcome to council. Whenever you're ready, you have the mic. Oh, Councillor Faubert, did you have something you wanted to say?
If anyone is interested, there is at the Economic Development Conference, Economic Development Alberta Conference is coming up in the spring at the Pomeroy in Kananaskis Country. Super accessible for us locals. And we know the president.
Thanks. Mr. Hannes.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of council. It's a pleasure to be here today. So today we'll be discussing the Stan Rogers Stage Project. This is a familiar facility for all of us here, located at Centennial Park, built in 1983. It was built with funds from the Canmore Folk Festival Society at that time, and it's been a hub of outdoor activity and entertainment since that time. Since that time, it's had some maintenance and expansion over the years. The wings on the sides of the buildings here on the right and left side, those are storage areas here. Those were built in 1995. At the same time, the washrooms on the park were also built to obviously address the expanding popularity of the festival at the time. And those wings actually are an important part of the structural assessment that we'll be talking about later on. There's a structure, that used to be the outside wall here, and that was since modified to gain access to those areas. In 2015, the roof was replaced from the cedar shakes to a nice patina steel roof. And in 2016, the floor throughout the stage was repainted as a maintenance item to extend the life of that floor. So in 2021, this year, the plan was to replace that floor. We cannot maximize the life any further. And so through that discovery, we identified that unfortunately, some of the structure, there's a roof there. Under the floor, we discovered that these posts were embedded directly into the ground. And so in this area here, we do have high water table. And what's typical with wood structure when it's enters, just like with fencing and that kind of thing, right at the grade here, where you get oxygen and moisture, that's where it's most vulnerable to rot and decay. So the logs themselves were treated, but they've started to fail. So through that discovery, we went to council earlier in the year to expand the operational project of $50,000 to replace the floor, to stabilize the building, cut out those pieces, and replace those before the high water table rises again in the annual cycle. Okay, and there's an example of the rot there. That's a metal bar here that's penetrated into the wood about 1 inch. Okay. What we've also discovered as we were going through the investigations here, this measurement stick shows that this structural beam here is out by approximately 1 inch or 2, actually 2 inches here. So the entire building itself appears to be leaning. And so we have to understand why that's the case. So part of it was likely because the structure itself was starting to fail. And as well, we do get high water table, which basically you see that with the roads all throughout South Canmore, that they rise and fall with the freezing and thawing of the annual cycles. So that might have been the situation here as well. But as well, you can see here on the side here, there's a double door here. So that's one of those double doors that go into the wing areas. So that's a structural exterior wall that was essentially, in hindsight, compromised the entire integrity of the building as well. So we have a number of different issues that are happening on the site here. So during the process, before we put a stop order to the project, this is the work that had been done. The post was cut as deep as we could, and then this footing and concrete post, the idea was to replace that, and basically the wood above grade is in good condition, and so the idea was to add that structure and do it 8 times over again with all the different posts in the building. Okay, so we paused the project to basically explore what the next option should be. When you're looking at the life cycle of this building, where it's at in its life cycle, what we could do with it in the future, we want to ask the user groups as to what the plans could be for it. We have a project in 2030 that explores raising the stage to improve the sight lines, expanding the building, those kinds of things, improving drainage, and those kinds of things in 2030. So the options were to basically carry on with the project as planned, basically invest the money now, improve those structures as we showed in the photos here, and basically extend the life of the building for about another 30 years or so, and then subsequently push out that expansion enhancement project. The other option was to demolish the project, or demolish the building and start over again and move that project actually forward, and do that in the next year or the coming years with council approval. And in the interim, we would use a temporary stage. The third option was to basically level the building in its entirety and just use temporary staging in perpetuity kind of thing. So that's an option as well. So the different user groups were solicited. Pine Tree Players, Canmore Folk Fest, Canmore Highland Games, Rocky Mountain Half Marathon, Valley Winds Music Association, Canada Day Fun Run, and the Canada Day group. So we got a number of different responses, and from those that did respond, the preference is to do the repairs now and extend the useful life of the building. And the primary user and the original builder of the facility, the Canmore Folk Festival Society, have actually been, saving some extra funds through their revenue generation for capital investment. And using those funds, they've offered to provide the town with $50,000. That would basically help subsidize this project quite significantly. In exchange for that offer, they would like to secure the August Day long weekend for their festival every year, and also continue to use this space in the wings here for their storage on a year-round basis without rent. So that's essentially the status quo scenario, and they would just like to have that formalized until such time this facility would be fully enhanced at a later date. So we think that's a very good option, and as such, we've crafted the recommendation to reflect that option. With the motion, the council approve a scope and budget increase to the capital project 7207 Stan Rogers Memorial Stage from $75,000 to a total budget of $175,000, funded by $50,000 contribution from the Canmore Folk Festival Society and $125,000 from the Asset Rehabilitation and Replacement Reserve. With that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hannes, for that full presentation. And does council have any questions?
I think it's just,
Yep. Councillor Faubert.
I ruined the mic button system single-handedly. What would it cost to build a new stage?
So we don't have that full budget expected, but we just looking in our estimations in our asset reserve databases, and it's over $1 million. We expect. Typically when we do these kinds of things, we want bigger and better. Yeah. And so if we decide to do with the log work, that's a premium cost as well. But that's a really rough estimate. But it's a big dollar figure to replace.
And with the repairs proposed under this recommendation, would that bring the stage level up at all for better sightlines? Not at
this point, no. This would basically repair the existing and extend the life of the existing.
Would it be possible to do that other thing to get an increase, a better audience? If we're extending the lifespan of this stage, can we make the stage a little bit better too?
That we'd have to re-engineer from the status quo, I guess, and we need extra funds. The likely better solution instead of piles might be a foundational wall for a building like this in size, if we're to do that sort of thing.
Ms. Smithers, did you want to add something?
Yes, thank you. I think that Councillor Faubert has really hit at the crux of the issue that administration faced, that we know that there are some challenges with that existing structure related to the sight lines for the audience, that it needs some electrical upgrades, that type of thing. And repairing means that we're pushing that bigger redevelopment project out further into the future, and that's precisely why we engage the stakeholders to acknowledge that there's trade-offs. We can fix what's there now, but it means that some of those other issues, like raising the stage and the electrical upgrading, we're not going to be able to get to till further out into the future. So that was part of the reason that we sat down with the user groups to better understand where they sat in relation to that trade-off that the administration was faced with.
Thank you. Councillor Ma?
Councillor Faubert covered most of my questions. Mr. Hannes, do you have like an incremental cost that would take to raise that thing up for the sight lines while we're at it?
It was a significant budget request. I'd have to look into my notes. I don't have that number offhand. I can follow up with that, but it was several $100,000, I'm sure.
Oh. Just hook it up to a helicopter.
It's not inexpensive work, and part of that project was to, right now there's no eavesdrops and that sort of thing. There's nowhere for that water to go, so we had to build, a French drain of some sort, and or some sort of drainage system. Yeah.
That's going to be the keeper quote. Oh. Exactly. Yeah. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. Mr. Hennis, what is the headspace between the lighting in the rafters and the floor itself? Is it 9 feet, 10 feet?
Oh, that's a story and a half kind of building. So
Okay.
it's...
The only reason why I'm asking is that a potential Band-Aid solution, if you're looking for a better visitor experience, is to put temporary risers on the existing repaired floor once it's repaired, which will therefore lift the, I have a bit of stage management experience, I did it in the before times. And so it would lift the performers up a bit. I just don't know how much space is between their hair and those hot lights, and that's why I was asking that question.
Right.
I've never worked this stage, I've worked many others.
Right, although the peak of the roof is a story and a half, they're basically...
But it's like where the lights actually go down.
Yeah.
So I would have to, anyways, it's just an idea.
Probably not a lot of headspace to do that, yeah.
But if a 1-foot riser might give the performers, that's a Folk Fest conversation.
Right.
But
And maybe there might be more options for daytime performances versus evening.
Yeah, and it just would, it's an interim solution if they're looking for a bit more height for audience experience. You could like tier it, like club seating. Anyways, that's all. Gotta stop doing that, John, or Sean.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Hannes, for coming and presenting to us today. I will now move that council approve a scope and budget increase to the capital project 7207 Stan Rogers Memorial Stage from $75,000 to a total budget of $175,000, funded by a $50,000 contribution from the Canmore Folk Festival Society and $125,000 from the Asset Rehabilitation and Replacement Reserve. And speaking to that motion, I will certainly support it, given the options that are available to us, and I'm very grateful that there will be a contribution from the Canmore Folk Festival Society. In fact, I will, on behalf of council, send them a letter thanking them for such. Are there any discussion or debates with regards to this motion? Councillor Faubert.
I support the motion. I'm sad that this isn't an opportunity to do better. And I wonder if at this point now we could change that for the future, in that we spend this money and we fix the stage and we make it safe and usable. And I know, like, the Folk Fest doesn't want bells and whistles. They're the Folk Fest, and they love their stage, and they definitely want to be part. They would definitely want to be a part of discussions in the future. But if we're looking at, we can start planning now for the new stage, and that's the key. Is that, I think that had we known now what we know now, like 3 years ago, we could have done a lot more in the last 2 years around this stage. But now we're looking into 2022. Folk Fest has just given up 2 years of events to change course and to try and come up with a new plan for this stage now would, I think, be chaos for 2022. And I think fixing the stage is the right way to go. But I also think that it would be really strategic to start now having those conversations in the community around, especially with the Folk Fest, especially with the acknowledgement of their contribution to this project. They built that stage. So thank you, and thank you for your hard work and report.
Councillor Faubert, I'd point, I agree with you. It's good to plan ahead for the future. I do note that these upgrades or these changes were not foreseen because they couldn't be foreseen until you pulled up the floor. So it's not like 2 years ago they knew that this would happen. The other thing is I think something is gained here. We get further life to this building, and it pushes down the replacement of it down the road, during which time there can be that planning. So, Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you. Again, it's unfortunate that we can't do more, but I think it's important that the repairs happen. It's your classic reno, you know, you start digging into it and then all of a sudden you find more and more. So it's totally unfortunate, but it is what it is. And again, I'd like to thank the Folk Fest for stepping up and contributing to these repairs. It is a beloved stage in our community, and you know, in the future we'll maybe get a bigger and better one, but for now it seems that most of the user groups are happy with this solution, so I will support this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Hammonds.
Have a good day.
Now moving to item H4, 2022 budget, master fee schedule and project cancellation. Ms. Richardson, the mic is yours whenever you are ready.
Perfect. I will just get this loaded up. How do I actually find my key? Yeah. Just this guy here. Oh, this guy. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, this one. You should be able to
I
find
think
it.
I would know this by now.
Oh my gosh, I forgot so much stuff.
It's been a while since I've had to do it this way. Got so spoiled with Town Square. Okay, I think I'm settled. So we have two motions for council to consider today. These had been discussed at prior finance committee meetings, so I will go through them relatively quickly. So the motions are that council approve the 2022 master fee schedule as presented, and that council direct administration to council those 4 capital projects. So first off, I do apologize. There is one change required from the version that was printed in the agenda package. Item 12.04 for the land use bylaw, the text amendments only. It should have read $620 per application, as is shown in my little snip here. The land use amendment lower portion was correct. Ms. Miller just caught this change, so that is one change that will be required from what was printed in your agenda package.
Just turning to Ms. Hyde, is that going to be considered, is that an editorial, or are we going to need an amendment for that?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I would recommend making an amendment.
Okay, will you be able to prepare the necessary amendment? And we can put it up there as soon as I call the question on that one?
Yes,
Okay,
leave your
thank
slide up for 1 second.
Sorry, Ms. Hyde.
Thanks.
I didn't know if I could do this and still have it be as presented, so.
Yeah.
I'll keep
Yep,
talking.
go
Perfect.
ahead.
So as a reminder, the master fee schedule does operate under the principle of cost recovery and user pay. Adjustments are made to the master fee schedule to reflect the cost of providing the service. The user pay principle is that then the person or business needing that service pays the fee rather than general taxes covering the costs of these services. Changes to this year's fee schedule include inflation in supply costs, fuel, and staff time. Some fees have also decreased in costs with process improvements or reviews of how much work it actually takes to provide these services where we've found efficiencies. Perfect. Finally, the budget amendments policy requires capital projects not eligible for carryover to be submitted to council for cancellation. That would mean a project has not started and we have received no quotes and no proposals or tenders have been issued. We have 4 projects to review with you today. So for the first project work, the business transformation work had not progressed as anticipated due to workload constraints, partly attributable to the continuing work related to COVID impacts and restrictions. Again, as a reminder from the Finance Committee discussions, there is a new project in 2022, but the intention had been for 3 years of this work. For the 2 IT lifecycle and new equipment projects, there were delays related to supply chain constraints, and again, the budget for 22 has been adjusted accordingly. And for the Business Registry City View project, further internal work needs to happen before this project moves forward, so that's been moved out actually to 2023. So again, most of this was covered before, so that actually concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions council may have at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Questions? Councillor Ma.
Thank you for this, Ms. Richardson. I know when we were doing Finance Committee, we had some conversations over probably what COLA would be more realistically at, so beyond the 1.5. And I was curious, we have a couple of line items here. We have, say, for example, for public works, we are bumping up the rates at 1.5%. Is there value in us as a council perhaps bumping that up to 3%?
So as a reminder, we bumped COLA up for 23 and 24, but for 2022, we did leave it at the 1.5% based on the calculation.
Okay.
So these rates are in effect for 2022, so are consistent with our budget. And then next year, when we come forward for future year master fee schedules, we'll likely be looking at incorporating those higher percentages.
All right. Okay. Thank you for the timing of that. Okay.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Richardson. I will then I'll make the first motion, but then I will make the amendment. So I'll move that council approve the 2022 master fee schedule as presented, and then I will move an amendment to that motion that council amends section 12.04 by inserting per application after land use bylaw $620. Is that correct?
Per application that needed to be added? It was the per application, and then the old fee also had a per hectare amount, and so that needed to come out entirely. I don't actually have the old version in front of me right now. Sorry, there's like the three columns of the unit, which is now per application, and then the fee itself.
So replacing per hectare with per application.
It was both before, I believe. It was complicated.
Okay.
Do you remember, Ms. Miller?
Ms. Miller.
To clarify, we also need to note that it's the text amendment, not the land. Section 1204 text amendment, is that correct? Yes. If you want to. Because there are 2 types of amendments that are listed under 1204. So the land use bylaw amendment remains the same. It's the text amendment. So that part, correct.
So I think there's a quotation mark missing, just in front of 620. quotation mark is missing in front of 620 then? So are we saying that the total fee here, instead of $2,250 plus an amount per hectare, the total fee is $620? Okay, so that's quite a decrease. Ms. Miller?
So to provide some context, a text amendment doesn't have a per hectare. So you're just changing words in the bylaw, so charging a per hectare fee gets strange.
Okay.
So for example, if an applicant is looking to add a use to a district, are we calculating per hectare for everywhere that that district in town applies? That seems a bit heavy for adding the word personal service to the list. So ultimately, it's more closely reflecting the actual work that's involved rather than charging the applicant for everywhere that the district applies. That seems a bit exorbitant because that per hectare fee of $22.50 can get quite hefty if you're looking at a district that is prevalent within the town. Does that provide
I understand now.
clarity?
So the land use amendment for district use or density still is a much higher fee. If somebody's just simply looking to change the wording, then
Correct.
it's $620.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Okay, so, and where everybody in administration that knows of such matters is now happy with this wording? Okay, good. All right, so now we have the amendment on the table that council amends section 12.04 land use bylaw text amendment by striking out $2,250 plus $620 per hectare and inserting $620 in its place. Any discussion on that proposed amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now returning to the main motion as amended. Or is there any discussion on the main motion to approve the 2022 master fee schedule as amended? Seeing none, I call the question. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. The next motion is that Council direct administration to cancel capital projects 7168, 7174, 7175, and 7176. Look to see if there's any discussion on that motion. Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item is one that I've provided a report on. It's H5. It's the EMS Ambulance Shortage. I will just highlight some of the main points. We know that there's a concern expressed not only within our community, but a number of communities in Alberta around the availability of ambulances in our community when they are needed. This has been partially, we have a centralized system, and while there is some change due to COVID, there's also a variety of other factors out there, and I'll just note those briefly. The reason we are able to look at this is that one of our purposes as a municipality under the Municipal Government Act is in Section 3C to develop and maintain safe and viable communities. So what we see with the statistics, and the statistics that I have attached to this report are provided, one from a FOIP request that was made through some local EMS to Alberta Health Services, and it clearly shows that there's both an increase in number of calls that ambulances that are stationed in Canmore are going to, and a lower percentage of them that are in Canmore, and a lower number of calls that are in Canmore, with an increasing number being in Calgary and other locations. Then I also have attached information that's been provided by our fire chief, and it shows that we are on, we're trending towards 70% of the time, the fire department getting to calls ahead of EMS. It actually peaked earlier this year at 80% and a low of 20% in December, but the overall trend is still going up. It also shows that the amount of time ahead of EMS is increasing. It's trending towards 8 minutes before EMS arrives. It peaked at the highest this past year was 13 minutes before EMS and a low of 2 minutes back in May of 2020. But once again, the trend is that it's higher. Should be noted that the town of Canmore is not reimbursed for providing these potentially life-saving services. And we are certainly grateful that the fire department can step in to this breach. In preparing this report, I've had several discussions with local paramedics, regional paramedics, the fire chief, as well as senior officials with EMS. And in that meetings with the senior officials at EMS, they indicated that they are aware of the problem. And it's something that they are working as best they can within the system to make changes. And I thought it would be important for council to hear what those are. That includes doing an increased triage at the point of the 911 call, determining if people can get to the hospital on their own, utilization of, for non-emergency transport, utilization of other means rather than our local ambulance that's here for emergency purposes. That said, there's a number of restraints that they're working with. Reduced availability of personnel. They do have money for more ambulances, but there's no availability of new ambulances due to chassis problems. And the system itself is in need of revamping. Of course, they don't have control over that. They can only work within their system. So with that being the case, what I'm putting forward to today is a motion that directs administration to invite senior provincial EMS officials to present at an upcoming committee of the whole on the ambulance situation, particularly in Canmore, with materials pertinent to our situation. And also so that I have the ability to participate in local and, more importantly, regional efforts to advocate to Alberta Health Services with respect to increasing ambulance availability in our community, which would be much better aligned with expectations of our residents. So that's what I'm asking, and I've outlined why I'm asking for it, and I would welcome any questions before putting those motions on the table. I should add, I don't think that this is administratively a burden at all. Otherwise, it would have gone through a different process to bring it forward. This is really about us addressing concern raised in our community, bringing that information to council, and then allowing me to participate in having those other discussions, knowing that council's in support of that. Councillor McCallum, you have a question?
Yes. So in reading your recommendations, it really seems to point to resourcing and financial resourcing. So even you articulated that there's new buses, new ambulances, but nobody really to operate them. Was that what I understood?
There's money for new ambulances.
Okay.
But there's no ambulances to be bought.
To be bought, right.
And then further that,
yeah.
Even if they had new ambulances, it would be tough to staff.
Yes, and so I understand that there actually are ambulances that are sitting, that were bought several years ago, that are sitting in a yard, unable to be staffed because of that exact reason as well, from people I know that work in EMS. So my question is that should we also be advocating, like I know that you speak to the province of Alberta, but there should be just some discussion with our MLA?
I would include that as province
of Alberta? Okay, I just wasn't sure if... Yeah, I just wanted to focus on the local piece as well. Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Seeing none, then I will move the first motion that council direct administration to invite senior provincial EMS officials to present at an upcoming committee of the whole on the ambulance situation in Canmore. I've already spoken to why I am making this motion, and I'd welcome any debate or discussion that anyone would like to have. Councillor Faubert?
Thank you, Your Worship. I support this motion, and I want to thank you for putting it on the floor for consideration, as well as for creating a situation where officials from Alberta Health Services can come to our community and speak to us in our council chambers about this situation. I think that there's a couple of issues at hand. We have the crisis we're currently facing of the supply of ambulances and staffing, but that's the Band-Aid fix. There's a deeper problem here, and that dates back to 2010 when Alberta Health Services took over this particular service in the province of Alberta, creating a system where local fire departments and municipalities have to backstop the lack of availability. And in no point whatsoever in the last 15 or 11 years has anyone been planning around increased visitation and increased populations. We still have the same number of ambulances we had decades ago in this community, but now instead of being able to keep one here to serve our community, they're both gone and being dispatched. So I think the mayor, what we're doing here and what the mayor has done and is showing leadership on is we've identified a critical issue in our community. We know what we can do, and we've been doing it, and that's the advanced life support capable response that our fire department offers. But engaging with conversations with the people in positions of power to not just go over how this acute crisis now is being addressed, but how into the future we're not going to end up in this situation again. And my last comment will be that it's a synchronicity. There's some synchronicity in that we had the master fee bylaw before us, right before this. Because I think the next step politically for us is to create a fee in our master fee bylaw to charge the province, even if we're not going to get paid for it, to start to actually quantify in a dollar figure amount what it is that our taxpayers are providing in terms of a backstop service to Alberta Health.
That's a very interesting suggestion. Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser, for bringing this forward. It's very important for our community, and I fully support this motion and the one that will be upcoming. Just thank you for bringing this forward. We all, I think, heard this loud and clear during the campaign and over the last while. Even before the election, we were hearing this. So it's very important for our community and communities across Alberta. So just again, thank you for starting these first few steps into hopefully some better days ahead.
Councillor Graham.
I too want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. It was brought up loud and clear during the election. It is an issue of concern for our community. It is about the safe and viable function of our community, and the number of times that we've been without an ambulance in the Bow Valley, let alone Canmore, is astounding. I want to thank everybody that has advocated on behalf of this issue, and I look forward to moving this one forward.
Any other discussion on this motion? Councillor Mott.
Full support for this, sir. Thank you for bringing this up. I too am kind of curious and interested to see if senior provincial EMS officials come and present. I think it's also a great opportunity for our community to get some insight on that presentation at the same time. And anything that helps fuel your advocacy efforts is a great thing. Thank you.
Just to close on that, they are very open to coming, and so I am quite positive that we will be seeing them in January. I'd also point out that we have had some very good local organization to bring awareness to this issue, and so I encourage the continued local participation. I'm hoping that this then adds the municipality's voice to a real cry for some systemic changes in the Alberta healthcare system. They were alluded to by Councillor Faubert, and certainly Councillor McCallum has spoken to them in the past about what happened with that centralization of the ambulance services to the province. So this is just us taking one further step towards that. I'll call the question on the motion then. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now I'll move that Council direct the Mayor to advocate on behalf of the Council to the Province of Alberta, especially Alberta Health Services, with respect to increasing ambulance availability to serve Canmore residents. Just speaking to this motion very briefly, yes, it absolutely involves discussion with our MLA, as well as I'm aware of other mayors in our region that are wanting to have this discussion, so I just wanted to be able to go to those discussions with the support of Council. And I would look to any discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now the next one should be a quick one. Are we needing a break? Okay. Let's take a 2-minute break while I try to figure out what the heck just happened. Okay. Okay. All right. And we're back. So item H6, this should be a quick one. In Finance Committee, we discussed this RCMP Retroactive Pay motion, which basically adopts, well, not basically, it does adopt the wording as circulated by FCM. And so, without any further explanation, I will move the recommendation that came from the Finance Committee that Council approved the following resolution. And I will read it if anybody needs me to. Otherwise, it's in your agenda package. Seeing none, is there any discussion on this resolution? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And now, item H7. This is the 2020 FRIAA grant-funded projects. And I see that Deputy Chief Mertens is here, and welcome to council. And whenever you're ready, the mic is yours.
All right, thank you, and good morning, Mayor and members of council. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and to see some familiar faces, and for those of you that I haven't had the honor of meeting yet, Carrie Martins, I'm the Deputy Chief of Canmore Fire Rescue. And I look forward to working with you over the next several years. So I'm here today to ask council to approve the addition of a new capital project to the 2021 budget that will be in place for the 2020 FRIAA grant process and the FRIAA grant projects in the amount of $218,000. In December of last year, we were awarded grant funding for 3 individual projects, and now the new capital projects needs to be added to the budget. Okay. So the work being accomplished with this grant funding follows recommendations that are within the town's wildfire mitigation strategy, vegetation management, interdepartmental and interagency training, and public education. The vegetation management project is ongoing in the Homesteads and Prospects neighborhood. The emergency management exercise took place in November and provided a really great opportunity for learning and interagency communication and cooperation. And it is our goal to host another Fire Smart Forum for community residents in the spring of next year. So that's the plans that we have in place for that funding, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. And so purely this is to make sure that it's on our books so that the grant funding can be spent.
Yes.
It's entirely grant funded, these items that you've brought forward.
It is, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Any questions from council? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. Deputy Martin, what kind of outcomes did we get from our last Fire Smart Forum? I remember it was in here, it was pre-COVID, and we had quite a good attendance.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of discussion about not only what materials you could use on your house, but what to do around your home. And I believe the fire department offered like an assessment of individual properties. Thank you. I'm saying it and I'm recollecting it all at the same time. What kind of uptake did we get on that?
We had quite a few. This past year, I mean, we had a little bit of a COVID blip where we weren't really able to go and do them, so that was unfortunate. Over the last couple of months, though, we've done, well, up until, September, October, we did, 10 to 15.
Oh, excellent.
And honestly, there was a little bit of an uptake on those after the Dead Man's Flats wildfire incident. So, our plan next year is to continue specifically with those home assessment offers and really market those a little bit more, because we do only do them if people request.
Right.
So, try to get word out a little bit more that it is an offer that's available to residents.
Excellent. And so it wouldn't just be available to single, detached homeowners. It
No.
would be for multifamily, for everything. So a condominium board could request it.
Absolutely. And
for
we've
their
done
complex.
several condominium complexes within the community already.
Awesome. What was the number one, if you recollect, the number one was there actually a number one barrier to homeowners making changes to their properties that they wouldn't consider within?
I would say from the homeowners we spoke to, one of the biggest concerns we have is roofing materials.
Right.
But a lot has been done in the community over the last several years to change that and to upgrade those. I think one of the biggest concerns we have now is decking materials and wooden decking. So, and obviously that's a financial undertaking when you consider replacing your decking material.
Gotcha. Right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? No. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Martins. For the functional exercise activity, will there be an opportunity for municipal elected officials to participate?
Well, so the functional exercise we already did in November, and unfortunately, you folks were at the AMA conference.
Councillor Hillstad was holding down the fort for us.
Yes. Yeah. He did. I don't think there's a vest for that, but we could maybe get one. In the spring, we're in the process of applying for another FRIAA grant right now, which will provide funding for a full-scale field exercise in the spring. And at that exercise, we would hope that there will be a lot more opportunity for council involvement.
Although one of the pieces of advice that I received and that we learned, many of us learned from the floods, was that some of the best things that the elected leadership can do is to, help spread communication. But other than that, get out of the way. So, yeah. 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 Any other questions? Councillor Ma?
Pleasure to meet you, Deputy Chief Carey Martins. Quick question here. It says in this zone, we're going to get to priority A and possibly priority B. With this degree of funding for 218 grand, how likely do you think we'll be able to get this in that B zone?
Well, so the 218 is all three projects. Mm-hmm. So the fuel modification project itself was $200,000, which is the maximum amount that we can request. That funding will get us through all of priority A, and we're hoping a little bit of priority B.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, this is an ongoing, yeah.
It is.
And my understanding is those areas that were originally done, they're now getting into the queue for being cleared again.
That is correct,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, thank you. Seeing no more questions, thank you very much for coming here. And I know you were sitting here through our discussion about the EMS, and so please take back to the fire hall our appreciation for all the work that the fire department does, both in suppressing fires but also in responding to medical emergencies.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Moving on to item H8. Pardon? I'm sorry? Oh, we actually had to vote on something there. I am telling you. Okay, the motion is that council approve a new 2021, and that is the right date, right? Yes. 2021 capital project for the 2020 Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. Projects in the amount of $218,000 funded through the FRIAA Fire Smart Grant process. Discussion on that motion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now moving on to H8, the TIP 2020 Transport Canada Grant. Ms. Smithers.
Thank you very much, Council, and I'll be providing a brief report on this as Mr. Asarte is on a well-deserved break in Cuba. Anyways, this is not dissimilar to the previous report. It's looking at an amendment to a budget to acknowledge receipt of a grant, and this is related to the TIP 20 project and a Transport Canada grant that we are eligible for a new traffic signal cabinet that accommodates train preemption and clearing phases after the trains go by. So we did receive a grant for this year. It's a matching grant. So the total scope of work was $305,000, which the Transport Canada grant will accommodate $244,000 of that. And so it's really a budget adjustment to just recognize the receipt of that grant. That's it for my presentation.
So the 305 was already in the budget, but this is to acknowledge that 244 of that will be covered by the grant. Is that right?
It's a $244,000 increase to the original
Okay.
budget approval from council because we'd received the grant. We were made aware of the potential for the grant just this year, went after it received the amount. So it's really just ensuring that the council approved budget amount matches.
So I misspoke. It was the difference between the 305 and the 244 was already in the budget.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Great. Any questions of council? Councillor McCallum?
So has this work been done already then?
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's what I thought. And this new cabinet that we're talking about, it's the one well, we have the cabinet, it's the chips that we're still waiting for. The control board.
I believe so. I would have to check with
Okay.
Mr.
All right.
Asante and his team.
I just wanted to make sure I was understanding it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Smithers.
Thank you.
So now I will move that council approve an increase to the TIP 20, which is number 7078, budget from $13,835,000 to $14,079,000, with the $244,000 increase to be funded from a Transport Canada grant. Any discussion on that motion? I certainly will support grant money. Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And moving to the last item on our agenda today, Dr. Cottle, you're going to speak to H9 Nordic World Cup waiving of fees.
Yes, I am. I'm here to inform council of a request we've had from the Nordic World Cup to have their use of the Civic Center for opening ceremonies, their rental fee waived. It's about approximately a $200 rental fee. They just held their opening event last Friday, and we only got the request last Monday. So there was not time to prepare a report. But I did want to speak to it a little bit because it speaks to a gap and a miss in our process. So I want to tell you sort of about how we got to the moment of this request, and we'll recommend that you grant it, but then also a bit of what the gap is and what we're planning to do to address it. So as I mentioned, the request is for about $200 waiving fee, and this is something that we've been doing for quite some time with Nordic events held at the Nordic Center. So in 2014, you may recall the town was the host for the Alberta Winter Games. And at the time, the council of the day contributed $50,000 a year for 2 or 3 years to help with the funding and the preparation of those games. And then it was decided that we would continue to hold about that amount of money every year in support for events. And that was partially at the request of some of the events that happened, the Nordic events that happened at the Nordic Center, requesting a bit more consistent town contribution and support for the events that they bring to town, and also just a recognition that there are all kinds of events that happen in town that could use different forms of support. So as a legacy for the Alberta Winter Games, $50,000 a year from the Economic Development Reserve was placed to support events. And initially, that was done through CBT. Canmore Business and Tourism at the time was also handling all of our economic development, so they got the business registry fees, and they were providing some of that event support and marketing and funding. And then when that organization fell apart, and we moved economic development in-house, we created that event grant. We incorporated it into the community event in the community grant policy, we incorporated events into that as well. And we took over managing that $50,000 and who it went to every year. In a similar time frame as I was mentioning, the World Cup organizers came and gave a presentation to council looking for stronger, more consistent support from the town, highlighting the benefits of World Cups to the community in volunteerism, community pride, and economic benefits, putting Canmore on a world stage. And asking for a stronger partnership and collaboration with the town, streamlining process and being a little bit easier to do business with. And that included not charging us for town services. So things like waiving of the rental fees if you use the Civic Center for opening ceremonies as an example. So we've been doing that for some time. Admin has been working for several years with the World Cup organization. And often what has happened is that in having a World Cup, they've also received event grant funding. And there was a decision made to not charge for rental fees at the Civic Center. Just from a process perspective, it was inefficient to cut them a check for hosting their event, then generate an invoice for something like $200 and ask them to write a check back to us. So somewhere a decision got made to just waive those fees as part of the work of doing business, and they're getting this event grant. And that has been happening for years where we haven't been charging, and we've just been giving away use of the facilities. But that also happened at the same time that we had for a while, for all of our events in town, we weren't charging anything with town facilities. And as we were updating and looking at a recreation policy, the recreation manager at the time asked the question, why are we charging for use, say if we look at Centennial Field, we're charging a local soccer club that provides soccer to kids in Canmore. They're being charged a fee to use Centennial Field. But a for-profit event is coming to town, and when they use Centennial Field, they're getting it for free. Why do we do that? And it was just a historic practice. One permit came in through recreation, so they charged. One permit came in through arts and events, and they didn't charge. So we took a look at that, and we made a consistency in policy between the recreation user policy and the event policy. So in 2018, I believe it was, we updated the event policy so that it now also has a pyramid, so that we're not giving everything away for free. And there's a bit more parity. The very small fee that the local soccer club uses is similar to the very small fee that a local non-profit providing a community event would pay to use Centennial Field. So there's more parity and consistency in what we're charging for events for our town structures. But this practice of the Nordic World Cups is one of the things that was sort of a historic practice and a bit of a gap. And because they don't have them every year, sometimes there's a couple-year gap in when they come, the practice of waiving their fee kind of continued even once that event policy was put in place in 2018. And that's a miss on Edmund's part. It shouldn't have been happening. But with the break in COVID, there haven't been any Nordic events in a while. They also did not get an event grant for this last event, but they asked for the waiving of the fee. And when that request came in, it really flagged, we've been doing something inconsistently in a way that we shouldn't have been doing, and we need to do something to address it. So they just asked, again, as I mentioned last week, for the fees to be waived, and they brought it forward. And with our fresh eyes, we realized we have a bit of work to do. So what we're suggesting as a go forward is that technically the waiving of rental fees in the past should not have happened. We don't have council direction, it's not in policy. We should have, if we were going to waive it, been reducing their grant amount by the $200. That also has not been happening because the two policies sit in completely different departments, and often one doesn't need to talk to the other to give the grant and then administer the event. So there's a gap there that we also need to close. And the policy has a few gaps. It doesn't speak to whether or not we're willing to waive any fees. If we are willing to waive fees, what is our approach to in-kind donations? Would we reduce the grant, or do we just give it in kind? There's no language to help administration in this kind of example. And really, it's not ideal to have a request like this come to council. This should technically not be happening. If we're going to waive fees, we should have some criteria that council sets up and then an internal policy for how we decide to do that, or some clarity that we're just not going to waive fees. So we'll need some policy direction on that. And so what we're proposing for 2022 is administration will work to update these two policies. The event policy needs an update, and the grant policy needs an update to address these gaps. We'll bring them back to council to get that higher policy direction, and then we can create internal processes that work from there. So we'll need to update event grant eligibility. We already know we need to do that because events like this Nordic event and mountain bike races that happen at the Nordic Center, for example, many of those they get approval to hold those events several years in advance. They need to be doing planning and fundraising for years compared to a local nonprofit community event that happens on an annual basis. And our event grant really isn't well suited for those multi-year events in the same kind of way. So we already know we have work to do on that grant anyway. So in the meantime, administration will do that work in 2022, but in the meantime today, this Para-Nordic event is sort of stuck in the middle of our mistake and our mess. So we're recommending that council approve their request and waive the fees for this year, which will give us time to address the gaps as we go forward. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about all that.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Dr. Cottle, for your presentation. You have reminded me, so we still provide grants for World Cup events, correct?
They have to apply.
Yes.
Through our event grant process, right. And in the last 2 years, both the community and the event grants we have tailored for COVID. They did not apply this year as part of the application, yeah.
So in past years, have we found that the granting dollars that we're providing World Cup events are being used to pay for fees at the Nordic Centre that could be waived by the provincial government?
I don't believe that we are. They have different arrangements with the provincial government for those fees at the Nordic Centre. So our grant criteria would be explicit about what those fees could be used for, and paying for the Nordic Centre would not be part of that.
Okay, perfect. I know there was a time when that was a gap, I think, and so I'm glad to hear that that's not continuing. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Faubert.
In the report around the Economic Development Task Force, there was one recommendation around a winter strategy. Would winter events fit into the winter strategy as well?
Yeah, it certainly very well might, and I would say that the Nordic Cup organizers would argue that it's fairly significant in terms of the impact. So that would be one of those examples where maybe if we're working on a winter strategy as part of our economic recovery, for certain event types, we would want to waive our town facility fees, right? But that currently we don't have any parameters around that. So that would be some of the work that administration needs to do, is to make some recommendations to council of how and when we would consider that. But that's a classic example of what a consideration would be.
I'm done. Do you want me
Any other questions?
She was not touching her microphone. Well done. Yeah.
Well done. Yes. Seeing none, thank you, Dr. Cottle. I will move that council waive the facility rental fees for the Para-Nordic World Cup for their use of the Civic Centre for opening ceremonies in 2021. I'm going to add that. Yeah. Is everybody clear on the motion? Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes. It may.
Oh, you just turned on by itself. Go ahead.
I'm trying. I will learn these buttons.
No, you did nothing wrong. You just turned it on automatically.
Well, I wanted to thank Dr. Cottle for her verbal presentation on this matter. I think that over time, what I've seen with respect to the municipality and events is that we have constantly been growing and learning and maturing at how to manage these things. Events are a major part of a tourism-based economy. And the type of event, when it's held, its size, road closures, there's all sorts of different parameters around that. And I'm really excited to be at the table to continue doing this work with administration around creating a future where the expectations are clear to event producers and to our community about what we want people to pay and when we're willing to support. And so I'm willing to support this. I think it's a very small amount and a very worthwhile event. So thank you. I didn't.
Just to pick up on that line of thought, this is a very small thing that we can do to support these events that are often put on a shoestring budget and heavily reliant on volunteers, and yet they have a huge economic impact. I believe the amount that I saw was that events such as this has over $1 million impact on our community. And so if we can support them in this small way, that's a very easy thing to do in order to help encourage these events in our community. That said, I do look forward to the revised policies coming back so that we can close this gap and make sure that waiving of fees, if they are to happen, are intentional and part of our policy. Any other discussion? Councillor Hillstad?
I too will support this, this motion to alleviate these fees for the rental. Thank administration for catching these things and coming back with some new policies. After being on the grant selection committee for the last 4 years, it kind of changes every year how we do it. So it definitely does need a bit of an update because it can be a bit of a struggle with how we do our granting right now. Just to, there's definitely some events and organizations in the community that have figured out ways to continually access the funds, but in different ways, which is part of our requirements at the moment. So I do look forward to updated policy with that in mind.
Seeing no other requests to speak, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And then I will move adjournment of this meeting. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone.